Good evening. Good evening and welcome. I call to order the Lakewood City Council study session in the city of Lakewood on May 15th, 2017. And this is actually a special day that in 1962, President John F. Kennedy declared today National Peace Officers Memorial Day. So as we go into the meeting, we want to definitely take a moment to remember our police officers. We actually had a nice remembrance ceremony last week to remember one of our fallen officers, and we thank our men and women in blue for what they do day in and day out. And so thank you. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul?
Here.
Coop?
Here.
Wickman? Gutwein?
Here.
Franks?
Here.
Harrison?
Here.
Roybal? Vincent? Abel?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Shakti?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Fantastic. So this is a study session, and we have two opportunities for public comment. Now, this public comment is a little bit different than what we would see at a regular meeting. The public comment tonight would be geared towards either the Sustainability Awards or the presentation that we're going to see on the annexation information, not one particular project. And I'm looking at the clerk to see if we have anybody signed up. And she's on her way. Thank you. All right, so let me see. I have a couple folks that have signed up, and let's see here, prior. So again, this would be prior, so this would be either on the Sustainability Awards or the annexation information, which we haven't had any of that presented yet. So would folks like to wait till after to speak, or would you like to go before? Ray? Okay. Alan? Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilors. I'm Alan Heald, and I live in Green Mountain Estates. And my comment tonight has to do with information. Specifically, information is helpful to the public in advance of attending a meeting so that we understand not only the issues, but facts around the issues. The general meeting that's coming up, or the topic that's coming up later, was this topic that was rescheduled from a March schedule originally. And I felt that it would be very helpful after the comments that were made in February regarding the importance of understanding annexation. It would be very helpful to have information from the city as background on that. And Dave Skilling, another citizen, requested quite clearly that any information on a future presentation will be very beneficial to the public in advance of a meeting. Well, as far as tonight's topic goes, even though it's a study session as opposed to a council meeting, I could find no information on the site. And so I found that a bit frustrating. And I think it's important, in light of the commitment made at the council retreat, to try to improve the flow of information for the benefit of council. Getting you your packets, in a timely fashion a week in advance of meetings will help you prepare. Well, the public is in the same boat. It would be most helpful, even though this is a study session, it's a study session coming up on a topic that has a lot of energy and a lot of interest. So my ask of you basically is to please provide more detailed information in advance of a meeting that has a great amount of public concern.
Certainly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Lynn Judson? Good evening.
Good evening, members of council, mayor. I wanted to just briefly state my agreement with the previous speaker that the information should be available to the citizens of Lakewood beforehand, and state that many people I've talked to are concerned about density in Lakewood and traffic, schools, the impact of development on these things, as well as obviously on our taxes. I have a concern as to the advisability of Lakewood annexing property that may have liabilities such as flooding or collapsing. I know the developer is responsible, but somehow the city could also be sued. I'm concerned about the impact on the city of annexing property that may not be the best property to build on. So those are my concerns, and
Great. Thank you.
for hearing me.
And then it looks like Adriana Hansen. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Oh, yes, here we go. I would like to echo the sentiment of the two previous speakers. We are very disappointed with, basically, we feel like the council is ignoring us. They will pay no attention to us regarding the annexation issues. The thing is that there is a reason we moved here. We didn't move to Denver. We don't want to live in Denver. And we strongly oppose, at least, in my family and also, my neighbors, we strongly oppose the annexation because there doesn't seem to be any thought given to all the things that are needed to support annexation, such as like the sewage, the schools. There's, also Xcel Energy does not want to add extra facilities to support this sort of thing. And I don't understand why no one is responding to us in a positive way. We feel that we are being ignored. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I will now close public comment, and will the clerk please read item 4?
Item 4, presentation, sustainability awards.
All right, so for the fun part, I will ask Mayor Pro Tem Harrison to please kick us off on our 10th annual, 10 years.
That's right.
All
10
right.
years. Welcome and thank you for being here for the presentation of the 10th Annual Lakewood Sustainability Awards. We have to get this to short people status here. Okay, now we're better. You're too tall. The City of Lakewood established the Sustainability Awards in 2008 to recognize members of the Lakewood community who were leading the way to a more sustainable future. Each year, the city receives nominations for projects and individuals that are making an impact across a diverse range of achievement areas, including climate action, energy and water conservation, economic resilience, zero waste, community cohesion, public health, natural systems, and transportation. Each nomination is judged on an overall positive impact of the project, how the nomination embraces innovation, how the project overcomes challenges, and how it can be replicated by others, and how it demonstrates initiative. The city gives the following awards. Youth leaders are recognized with the Defender of the Planet Award, Youth. Lakewood employees are awarded the Bruce Peoples Eco Employee Award, and community members receive the Community Sustainability Award. Along with this ceremony this evening, the city showcases the recipients of the Lakewood Sustainability Awards in 3 ways. First, the Sustainability Award plaque lists all the award recipients and are displayed here in the Civic Center to the left of the James J. Ritchie Gallery. The second tribute is a sustainability garden on the west side of the Public Safety Building in recognition of each year's recipients. And the third place is the city also features the award recipients on the city website at lakewood.org/sustainability awards. Over the past 10 years, the Lakewood community has demonstrated how leadership in sustainability can take many forms, from 2 young women sorting recyclables in their cafeteria, to a local business installing renewable energy system for reducing its carbon footprint and saving money. All of our past award winners have moved Lakewood forward, becoming a more sustainable community. Tonight, we will be celebrating our 10th year and 100th award winner. To celebrate these milestones, the Sustainability Awards Committee has put together a 10-year Sustainability Awards book, which you probably saw if you were part of the reception. The book is now available for downloading online at lakewood.org/Sustainability Awards. We'd like to thank the Sustainability Awards Evaluation Committee members. They work hard to ensure fair and equitable judging standards. We truly appreciate their time and effort that goes into making these awards an honor to win. We'd also like to thank our community partner. Anybody enjoy dinner tonight or the reception? Rubio's Coastal Grill provided our meal tonight prior to the ceremony. Their generosity has made this celebration of Lakewood sustainability leaders possible. As we present the awards tonight, we'd like for our friends and family winners to know that it's all right for you to go right up here in front or right here in front of the lectern to take pictures or to have video. Judy Morse will be assisting the mayor in the awards presentation. Jody is retiring from the city in 2017. Now wait till you hear this. After a remarkable career at Bear Creek Park, engaging Lakewood community members of all ages and backgrounds. Over the course of her career, Jody has led more than 2,700 environmental programs. That's a lot of programs. Jody has been a constant leader of the Employees Committee for the Sustainable Lakewood and has inspired countless individuals through her time with the city. You'll find a video of this award ceremony online at lakewood.org/council videos. Now it's time to start the awards. Defender of the Planet category. This is the most fun as far as I'm concerned. The Defender of the Planet Award is presented to the youth, 18 years or younger, for taking the initiative at a young age in the field of sustainability. This year, we have 2 Defender of the Planet Awards to present. The first Defender of the Planet Award goes to, drum roll please, thank you, Green Mountain Area Homeschoolers. Now you have to listen to what these future leaders of Lakewood have done. The Green Mountain Area Homeschoolers combined curiosity and a personal initiative to address water conservation and clean up waterways in Lakewood. The students began their project by touring a local water treatment plant, watching the documentary The Great Divide about Colorado water history and issues, learning about watershed monitoring, and interviewing Lakewood city staff and elected officials. Using the funding from Jane Goodall Institute, the students planted willows along Bear Creek to prevent erosion, picked up trash along the riparian corridor, and distributed native low-water seeds to residents. The students also created an educational art display at Belmar Library to share information on how to protect water resources. As a result of their hard work, these students not only learned a great deal about water issues, but also taught us about discovery, determination, and the direct action comes together to make significant impact. This is the Green Mountain Homeschoolers' second year in a row to win this award, setting a powerful example. Setting a powerful example for other youth in Lakewood. Thank you very much. Okay, our second Defender of the Planet Award goes to the Hutchinson Elementary Environmental Club for organizing an Earth Day Eco Fair. Okay, come on down. Bring your cameras down. Come on, come on. This is a special time. The Environmental Club at Hutchinson Elementary decided to celebrate Earth Day by helping others recycle materials that cannot go into the typical recycle bins. The students planned the event from beginning to end. Let me say that again. The students planned the event from beginning to end, overcoming financial obstacles through funding from the Jane Goodall Roots and Shoots grant program and the school's parent-teacher organization. The event provided a variety of recycling and repurposing opportunities for miscellaneous and hard-to-recycle items. Now wait till you hear this. They collected more than 6,000 pounds of shredded paper, 5 bins of electronics. Now listen, 1 tractor trailer of used latex paint, hundreds of donations to the ARC thrift store, and more than $2,000 in donations to the Environmental Club. With the earnings, the club plans to beautify the school garden, working toward getting rid of styrofoam and plastic flatware in the cafeteria. The City of Lakewood is proud to recognize these young leaders as Lakewood's 2017 Defenders of the Planet Award winners. Now, our next category is the Bruce Peoples Eco Employee category. This award was created to reward the initiative in city employees. This award was named to honor the memory of Bruce Peoples, a longtime Lakewood employee committed to environmental awareness during the course of his work. We're proud to have his memory live on through the innovation and dedication of our city employees. This year, we have 3 projects that receive an Eco Employee Award. The first goes to Alexis Moore for her years of dedication to the Two Creeks neighborhood. Alexis, come on down. Where are you? Now, just in case you don't know, in Northeast Lakewood, the Two Creeks neighborhood is undergoing renaissance championed by the Lakewood Principal Planner, Alexis Moore. The transformation began in 2013 with neighborhood planning effort led by Alexis and her team, focusing on pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, improving access to healthy food, and creating a safe community gathering space. The planning effort sparked the creation of Mount Air Park Community Farm. Anybody familiar with that? Yeah. The development of the 40 West Art Line, an interactive 4-mile art route. Anybody walk that yet? Okay. Over the years, Alexis has helped the city to forge meaningful relationships and build trust with residents by meeting and engaging the residents where they were. Places like schools, churches, and community events. By listening to resident feedback and communicating about how everyone will benefit from activities, Alexis and her team have been successful in engaging a broad spectrum of the community and creating a movement in which the entire community can take part. Thank you, Alexis. This one is a fun one. I had pictures of this one. The second Eco Employee Award goes to Stephen Wilson. Come on down here, Stephen. After years of watching plastic film fill up the office trash cans, Principal Planner Stephen Wilson decided to do something about it. Because plastic film and single-use grocery bags cannot be recycled in a typical single-stream recycling bin, Stephen created a recycle station in his own office by taking advantage of the TREX, T-R-E-X, plastic film recycling program. TREX takes plastic that are clean, dry, and free of food residue and recycles them into, you got it, durable outdoor products, like decking and benches. By keeping the recycling containers in his office, Stephen monitors what is collected and can ensure that all the collected materials are eligible for the TREX program. Stephen's initiatives serve as an example for those who want to find a solution to everyday problems by demonstrating creative problem solving and dedicated follow-through. Thank you, Stephen. The third Eco Employee Award goes to Jo Donaldson for her leadership through the Employees Committee for a Sustainable Lakewood. Jo, come on down. Jo Donaldson joined the Employees Committee for a Sustainable Lakewood in 2009, just 1 year after the committee was formed. Most new committee members start their service by attending a few meetings, quietly observing as the team discusses various projects and ideas, and then slowly getting involved by volunteering for a task or two. Not Jo. She jumped right in. Within a few weeks of joining, Jo was taking minutes, had volunteered to help plan an Earth Day Expo, and had joined the Sustainability Awards Committee. For the next 8 years, Jo worked tirelessly behind the scenes to grow the committee and its various programs. The Sustainability Award program is celebrating its 10th year due to a great part of Jo's vision and tireless work. The positive impacts of her efforts can be seen in the leadership and the inspiration she passed to the community through Lakewood's annual Earth Day celebration and Sustainability Awards program. Jo's years of action should inspire each of us to find a project that we are passionate about and make a meaningful contribution to our workplace and communities. Thank you, Jo. Okay, now we're going to go into our community sustainability category. This recognizes projects and initiatives in Lakewood that lead lead the way to a more sustainable future. This year, we have 5 projects that will receive a Community Sustainability Award. The first goes to the Volunteer Green Team. I bet you can't figure out who those might be. Hey, come on down. In 2016, the Volunteer Green Team for Lakewood's Heritage, Culture, and the Arts Division set its sights on zero waste events and educational efforts. For an event to be considered zero waste, 90% of all waste generated must be diverted from the landfill. The Green Team nearly reached this goal by diverting 88% of waste from the landfill from the Sounds Exciting Summer Concert Series and successfully reached 90% for the Cider Days event, which attracted 12,000 attendees and generated, are you ready? 5.35 tons of waste. 90% of that did not go to the landfill. The Green Team has contributed its time and expertise to outreach projects in 2016, including the construction of a mini compost educational displays for the Denver Urban Gardens and the Denver Recycles, to educate the community and student groups in the region about composting yard and kitchen waste to keep it out of the landfills. The Green Team's innovation and creativity, along with its teamwork, are a perfect example of passionate individuals working together and achieving amazing and measurable results. Thanks all. Go Green. All right. Our second Community Sustainability Award goes to the Metro West Housing Solutions for Cityscape at Belmar Senior Apartments. Cityscape at Belmar Senior Apartments challenges the boundaries of what senior and affordable housing can be. This Metro West Housing Solutions development minimizes environmental impacts, enhances the character of the community, and protects Lakewood's natural resources. The project achieved Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, known as LEED, L-E-E-D, Platinum certification, and is within walking distance of public transit. The apartment community promotes an active lifestyle by providing bike storage, community gardens, and easy access to the outdoors. Cityscape's landscaping showcases native plants that support wildlife and pollinator species while minimizing the amount of water needed for irrigation, saving an estimated 46,000 gallons of water each year. With Colorado's largest on-site photovoltaic solar system for a residential building and efficient energy systems, Cityscape experiences more than 50% savings in energy use. Indoor materials were carefully chosen to promote a healthy living space and maximize the use of recycled and locally sourced materials. During construction, listen to this, this is amazing. The development diverted 92% of its waste from the landfill. Now think about construction. That's pretty amazing. And installed dual recycling and trash chutes on each floor. Metro West's integrated design approach to sustainability demonstrates that sustainability and innovation go hand in hand and sets a new standard for sustainable development in the city of Lakewood. Thank you very much. The third Community Sustainability Award goes to Jen Tun for her leadership in the South 6 Sustainable Neighborhood. Here she comes. Jen has been a leader in the South 6 Sustainable Neighborhood initiative since it applied to the city's Sustainable Neighborhoods program in 2013. As a charter member of the group, Jen helped provide guidance on neighborhood projects and initiatives while working diligently to connect neighborhood residents and build community to ensure the neighborhood success in the program. Some of the many projects that Jen organized in 2016 included a light rail community ride, a water treatment plant tour, many monthly meetings that allowed neighbors to come together to discuss topics important to their community. After 3 years of effort, Jen helped lead South 6th Avenue to achieve certification as an outstanding sustainable neighborhood. From the beginning, Jen took charge of this new program, and her hard work and dedication has resulted in opportunities for residents throughout the neighborhood to have ownership of projects that contribute to a more sustainable community. Thank you, Jen. The fourth Community Sustainability Award goes to the Gold Crown Foundation for their LED lighting retrofit of the Gold Crown Fieldhouse. In 2016, the Gold Crown Foundation made its biggest investment in sustainability to date by putting in new lamp fixtures in the Gold Crown Fieldhouse with a high-efficiency LED lighting system. The facilities director, Alicia Gilb, led the effort. Now think about this, try to convince a board of this. She gathered figures on costs and savings to secure funding approval from the board of directors. In total, 410 fixtures, 1,246 bulbs were replaced during the project. The foundation estimates that it will save nearly $180,000 over the life of the new lighting system due to the reduction in energy use and the long life of LED fixtures. The project also improved the user experience through better lighting, increased the safety of the parking lot, and enhanced the functionality of security cameras. The success of this project can serve as a model for other organizations and large gymnasiums or community spaces and demonstrates Gold Crown's Foundation's commitment to sustainability. Thank you, Gold Crown. And certainly not least, but our last winner tonight, our fifth and one, is our Lakewood Sustainability Award goes to the Lakewood Bicycle Advisory Team. In 2015, a group of bicycle enthusiasts came together to form Lakewood Bicycle Advisory Team with a goal of improving bicycling conditions in Lakewood. Through community engagement, education, and policy advocacy, the team has accelerated Lakewood's journey to becoming an even more bicycle-friendly city and has fostered a strong community of cycling advocates along the way. The team has been engaging residents across the city through neighborhood bike rides, hosting the Lakewood Earth Day Celebration Bicycle Valet Station, and advocating for extended bicycle paths and teaching bicycle safety courses. Most recently, the team has championed, and I love this, Cycling Without Age initiative, which enables volunteers to provide rides to older adults who can no longer have the ability to ride a bicycle. By promoting bicycle use in Lakewood, the team is reducing Lakewood's carbon footprint, improving community health, and advancing Lakewood's community goals. Thank you so very much. This concludes our award. Thank you so much to all the award winners. Your work is truly, truly impressive. Thank you for making Lakewood a more sustainable place to live, work, and play. We'd also like to thank again Rubio's Coastal Grill for once more sponsoring awards and reception, members of the Lakewood Sustainability Awards Committee for organizing tonight's awards. And I want to recognize the committee themselves. Would you please stand so we can say thank you? Jonathan Wachtel, Lynn Coppage, Alicia Williams, Donna Rapp, Elisa Vogan, and Jody Morse. Thank you so much.
Well, that concludes our awards ceremony. I just want to thank you all again. And thank you for the leadership. It's so cool to come out to these and see what's going on in all different levels of the community, and always great to see what our kids are doing. So thank you all, and you're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you'd like. But we understand if you'd like to maybe go home, that's all right too, so we'll give you a chance to leave if you'd like. But one more round of applause. Oh, yeah.
Tim? 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 Yes, it is. Did you include a picture of Frida Poundstone in this?
No pictures. Contributions are recognized.
Good. That's a charitable work.
Anderson, how you feeling, buddy? Nice. Welcome back. My apologies. We have a couple of seats missing. Did you want to come sit up here for nostalgia's sake?
He has to sit on the right.
Police officers, but they don't look tough.
All right, fantastic. Well, we will continue on with our study session for the evening. And before I turn it over to our city attorney, Tim Cox, there were a couple comments made about tonight's presentation. And we did originally have it scheduled for March. However, our presenter had a scheduling conflict, so that's why we are now taking this on at this point. And essentially, for this group, for the majority of this group, we have not had too many annexations. It's something that comes through very infrequently. I was reminded tonight, I think we had one, which was the Taylor property in southern Lakewood. And so tonight is a high-level overview because there is a potential that there could be annexation requests coming our way in the future. So this will be a nice opportunity for the community as well as the council to learn a little bit about what that looks like. Mr. Abel, did you have a comment?
I did. I just wanted to echo the comments about not having information available. There's a lot of documentation out there about annexation and how it's done in Colorado, and it might have been helpful for us and the community. So next time.
All right, Mr. Cox.
There we go. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about annexation. It was my scheduling conflict that led to the postponement of this, so sorry if I've kept you on the edge of your seats that much longer. It's true that we have not had a lot of experience with annexation here in Lakewood recently, and it's been our practice to try to get you a little bit of information when you deal with something out of the ordinary. We gave a very brief, what turned out to be a very brief primer on special districts when a matter came up there, and just want to make sure you're armed with the basic information so that if and when applications come your way, you'll be ready to take them on. And of course, we'll provide guidance, legal guidance as we can throughout the process. So it's Annexation 101. It's an easy title, but that's basically what it is, just the foundations of the annexation process and the substance of it, the purpose of it. And we'll try to cover that quickly and efficiently for you. We can get this mouse to work. There we go. All right. So here's a sort of table of contents of what we're going to try to cover in abbreviated fashion. A quick statement about the purpose. The various types of annexation, there are basically three. Criteria for eligibility and some limitations. Requirements for a petition on annexation. The petition is used in one of the three types of annexation. The relationship, the interplay between annexation and zoning. Annexation elections, that's another of the three types. A summary of the process used for annexation petitions primarily. That's the most common form. The third type, we'll spend just a couple of minutes on unilateral annexations. A word about how challenges to annexations go up to the courts. And then a very brief discussion about the idea of having an annexation ordinance to state policies and other provisions, which the city does not currently have. You'll have to get used to that. So this just restates what we wanted to emphasize, that this is an overview of the procedural and substantive requirements under the Colorado statutes, the Municipal Annexation Act of 1965 in particular. For those who aren't familiar with them, little squiggles off to the right of that second line are sections, referring to the sections in the statute, and the et sec refers to sections that follow. 31, 12, 101, that's where the Annexation Act begins. The purpose tonight is not to address any particular annexation request. They are legislative in nature, and so they can be generally discussed outside of the hearing process. But most annexation cases are paired with zoning requests as well. And as we all know, zoning is considered quasi-judicial and has all the restrictions that go with that. And we'll touch on that a little bit greater depth further on in the presentation, but did want to emphasize that we're not talking about any applications that are coming in or already in the pipeline. So I mentioned the three types of annexation. There was a constitutional amendment back in 1980 that offered these three alternatives. One is the majority petition, referred to as a majority petition because that law established a requirement that at least 50% of the landowners of the area to be annexed, proposed to be annexed, and the owners of more than 50% of the land. So both numbers have to be met. The number of people relative to the total number of owners within the area, and the percentage of the land represented by those owners. This is just to introduce you to those topics. We'll touch on them a little bit more later. The second type is the petition for election, which is a vote of the landowners and registered voters, both within the area proposed to be annexed. It has a different eligibility threshold, and then it does require the election within that area. And then the third type is unilateral, meaning the city can do it on their own initiative by ordinance without a lot of the public notice requirements. This is, again, a state provision, so it's true everywhere across the state. And it refers to land that is completely owned by the city and enclaves which are completely surrounded by the city that is proposed for the annexation. And again, more on that in just a little bit. Eligibility generally, the best known and most significant requirement for eligibility is the idea of contiguity. You can't have an annexed property that does not touch in a significant way another part of the city's jurisdiction, and it's 1/6 under the state law. There are ways of measuring 1/6 that engineers and surveyors can explain to you. Suffice to say that even if you have, say, a long, narrow strip of land, doesn't have to be a right-of-way, but it could be, if you're annexing that and you, at the end of that, there's a piece of property, you can serially and simultaneously annex land to get the 1/6 contiguity. So the piece that's next to the existing boundary has 1/6 contiguity if you cut it here, and the next piece, and so on and so on. It's easier to illustrate than to discuss, and it is recognized in state law as a legitimate way of establishing contiguity. But one way or another, you have to be able to have the 1/6 contiguity in order to be eligible to annex the land. There are other requirements that there has to be a community of interest between the city annexing and the property to be annexed, that the land is or can be, and this is an unusual word in some contexts, but urbanized to be brought into the city, and then a similar requirement that the land can be integrated into the city. The significance of these three is that if you have the required contiguity, and again, if you don't, you're out anyway, but if you have established the 1/6 contiguity to the satisfaction of the city, then the three other requirements are presumed to exist. They can be, the presumption can be overcome with other evidence that rebuts the existence of a community of interest, for example. But in the typical case, once the eligibility is established through contiguity, those three requirements are deemed to have been met. And there's a note here that when in the process of determining whether the contiguity and the other requirements exist, the council should be making specific findings of fact, so it's clear that all of those have been considered. There are several limitations on eligibility. I won't go into great depth on each of them, but there are a variety of limitations for different reasons. One that's noteworthy is the 3-mile annual limit, that you cannot annex in such a way as to extend the city's boundary more than 3 miles in any one direction during the course of a year. And one of the requirements that arises out of that limit is the need for a 3-mile plan, as it's called. See at the bottom there, disconnected municipal satellite. You can't do an annexation that results in a piece of city property or property within the city being isolated on its own. That usually happens more with disconnections than with, which is the opposite of annexation, sometimes called de-annexation, but a disconnection takes property outside of a municipality, and sometimes that could result in a satellite property that's not allowed under law. And several others, including the second one there, that if the property consists of 20 acres or more and is all owned by the same person with an assessed value of more than $200,000, it is not eligible to be annexed. I suspect there was a piece of property somewhere that fit that description and was the subject of some lobbying at one point in the past. I apologize for the size of the text here. This one was not enlarged. I must have missed this page when I was finalizing the formatting. The requirements of a petition include a demonstration of compliance with the first two sections there, 104 and 105 of the statute. Those are the ones with the contiguity and other eligibility requirements. Meeting that 50% threshold to be able to be eligible for annexing. The signature and address of each petitioning landowner must be on the petition, and a description of each of the properties that those petitioning landowners own. The affidavit of the person who circulated the petition, and 4 copies of a map. There are obviously recording and filing requirements after approval that have to be met. A couple of things that are sort of side issues, but very important to the annexation process. The annexation impact report, per the statute, the city that would be annexing is required to prepare about a month before the public hearing on the annexation, an annexation impact report, unless the property is less than 10 acres in size. it's been recognized consistently that that really should be at least the financial obligation of the applicant. And so in most cases, that is what happens. Whoever actually performs the work to prepare the impact report, typically the proposed annexing party, the developer, if you will, is required to pay for the cost of that. And that is an opportunity to look at a variety of impacts, anything from traffic to schools and some of the other things that have been mentioned in this context. That's an opportunity to try to determine what that impact is likely to be and help make the determination on the annexation itself. Next is the annexation agreement, which has become pretty much commonplace. It is not mandatory, but it is an opportunity to cover a lot of things that are not addressed specifically by the statute. Those jurisdictions that have an ordinance, a policy on annexations may make that a requirement and identify a list of things that can be covered or should be covered in that annexation agreement. We touched on this at the beginning. The difference between annexation and zoning when they're filed together, obviously when they're not as well, but when they are brought together, you have the problem of an annexation decision, which is considered a legislative process, and that can be the subject of lobbying to the decision makers, and you can have contact with other people. You can do your own research. You can talk to people about how you would be inclined to vote on a legislative matter. And that is what annexation has been recognized as legislative, like so many of your other functions. But zoning, as you know from experience, is considered a quasi-judicial process, and that comes with it the prohibition on ex parte contacts, talking to people outside of the public hearing process about the case. If people who have issues with prejudgment or bias based on a knowledge of the property or the individuals involved, and a difficulty being objective in making a decision as a result of that relationship. Those are all part of the quasi-judicial restrictions, which once an application is filed means you really can't discuss or talk about the case with anyone. And it's very difficult to reconcile those two and figure out how you can talk about an annexation without talking about the zoning. And as a result, we generally advise to play it safe, be conservative in that regard, and try to avoid discussions that are likely to get into the land uses and the standards proposed for the zoning of the property. There are cases where it might be easier to separate. There's a proposal that involves annexing a right-of-way that bisects a piece of property that is already in the city. And the property would be zoned, but the right-of-way needs to be annexed. So it's not the same situation where you're bringing in property and zoning it at the same time. Just an example of how you can, in that case, probably discuss the project more freely. The reason zoning typically happens along with an annexation proposal is because the state law requires zoning to be completed within 90 days after the annexation. And it's generally easier to consolidate them and hear them together than to do the zoning after the fact. Now, it's not up there on the screen, but it is fairly common practice to use an annexation agreement to address the zoning. Very often the annexation agreement will have a provision that says the developer or applicant agrees to zone the property, whatever designation it is, subject to the ultimate approval of the annexation, of course, and other restrictions. Now, there are a couple of schools of thought on whether the annexation agreement is a proper vehicle for talking about zoning, or whether that should be confined to the zoning hearing process. But just as a point of information, that is frequently done in other cities. As I said, the review of those applications are typically done at the same time. There are sometimes issues with timing where one case gets ahead of the other for one reason or another, and there are ways that conditional approvals can be granted for various reasons so that the zoning process could be completed, for example, if it is not done when the annexation is done. But the goal is to have them done together. Annexation elections, again, this is the second option for annexing property. It involves a public hearing, just as the petition process does, and then the petition to the district court to conduct the election. Election commissioners are appointed by the court. Notice is published, and there are certain ballot requirements. And ultimately, the election decides the annexation, but up to that point, the process is really very similar. It's just a smaller percentage of the individuals involved with the property, the subject property, that makes this sort of an alternative when you can't get the 50%. Just another look at the petition requirements. That they are the signatories are qualified electors, and the request for annexation election. This is, again, the election petition, and there are the numbers that we're talking about. Instead of the 50% of owners and 50% of land, you need 75 registered electors, or 10% of the registered electors within the area. In Jefferson County, it's a smaller number in small counties per the statute. Now we're back to the basic annexation petition process and adhering to the 50-50 requirement. The landowner submits the petition. If substantial compliance is found with the eligibility requirements and the other requirements for an annexation petition, then the city adopts a resolution of finding substantial compliance. It's kind of an interesting requirement, because there's been case law most recently of at least one annexation where the post-annexation requirements of signing, recording, filing were not precisely met, and in that case, the court essentially found that the annexation was void because it had not been strict compliance, basically, with the post-annexation process. But per the statute, in the initial review, if the council finds substantial compliance, which leaves a little bit of wiggle room, but obviously we would strive or advise any applicant to strive for strict compliance with all the requirements. After that resolution, notices are published for a public hearing, specific publication requirements there. The annexation impact report is to be prepared at least 25 days before the hearing. And again, that's a city requirement per the statute, but applicants are generally expected to pay for that. And then on the ultimate decision, it is, if you're looking for the criteria that say these are the things you must find in order to annex property, that's not really the case. It is a discretionary move, just like with any other legislative action. A council can, for whatever reason, decline to approve an annexation, relying on the information presented at the public hearing, relying on the annexation impact report. Obviously, there cannot be an illegal or improper reason for denying an annexation, but generally speaking, there is full discretion on the part of the legislative body in that case. The public hearing is held after that time period passes, following the resolution of substantial compliance, and then is by ordinance to approve. And there must be a finding at that time as to whether an election is necessary. And if not, then the ordinance and map get recorded. If the annexation is denied, there is a 1-year prohibition on a new petition being filed for that same property. And we for emphasis, left the same statement at the bottom of that page regarding the discretion of the legislative body. Quickly on unilateral annexations, this is when you have an enclave. An enclave is a piece of property that is entirely within the boundaries of the municipality for a period of at least 3 years. And the additional requirement that no part of the boundary can be formed by a public right-of-way. So if you have a piece of property that is surrounded by Lakewood but has never been incorporated into the city as unincorporated Jefferson County, the process for approving such an annexation is much simpler. It can be initiated by the city with or without the cooperation of the landowners. There are a couple of examples within Lakewood of enclaves, and again, there's no obligation to annex them. Sometimes it's a matter of cleaning up boundaries or clearing up jurisdiction for law enforcement and such. Sometimes there's a financial incentive, but it is strictly discretionary on the part of the city council. And that's done without, really, by ordinance, without the public hearing requirement. The other example of a unilateral annexation is when the city owns the land. If it's the sole owner, still has to meet the contiguity requirement and can't be solely right-of-way, but it goes through the same process as the enclave annexation with no notice or hearing required and approval by ordinance. Just a quick note here on the avenues for relief of someone aggrieved by a decision in the annexation process. I'll start at the bottom because that's what you're more familiar with. The zoning part of an annexation and zoning package is reviewed by the district court under what's called Rule 106A4, a petition in the nature of certiorari, with the very high abuse of discretion standard. And this is true whether it's a zoning attached to an annexation or a rezoning standing alone. There really has to be a finding that there's no competent evidence in the record to support the decision, and that is a very high standard to overcome. Annexation decisions, there's a separate statute for reviewing those decisions, and the only people who can bring such a challenge, a landowner or a qualified elector within the annexed area, the Board of County Commissioners, or a municipality within 1 mile of the property. But that's the avenue for review of an annexation for those individuals and entities. And then, again, just a mention of the idea of a policy or ordinance for annexations if the city anticipates that more will be coming in a relatively small period of time. It's something that we can certainly consider. One of the benefits is to have a statement of policy. You can have an ordinance that begins with a statement that the city finds that, and you can list factual findings and conclude with, therefore, it is our policy to disfavor, favor, support, approve, scrutinize, whatever the council believes is the right approach. Putting people on notice that, for the reasons stated in that policy, you may have an uphill battle if it's this type of annexation or in this type of location, and it just gives everybody a little bit of an idea of where it's likely to go. You can also set some procedural processes along the way that are not specifically mentioned by the statute. It gives you a little bit more clarity and predictability in the process. Obviously, there are reasons not to do it because you're bound by what's there, and if the next annexation that comes along you look at a little bit differently, then it might be out of sync with the policy that you've adopted. But it is something that we can certainly help the council with if you so desire. So that's Annexation 101, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. I appreciate the presentation. Actually, looking out, I see quite a few of our planning commissioners here as well, so it's nice that you all made it out tonight to learn with us. One quick question. Historically, why don't we have an ordinance? And does that come down to because it's not something that we do very often, or?
I don't know what happened in the years before I got here. I don't know how often it might have come up. We went several years since I've been here without any applications, and it was, it's one of those rainy day things. If the roof's not leaking, you don't think about patching the hole. So I think we've brought it up on a couple of occasions internally, but it hasn't been a high priority because of the lack of applications. The same thing with the special districts. We've talked about an ordinance that lays out more of a policy or a procedure on how to handle those applications, but until recently there hasn't been many opportunities for that review either.
Thank you. Ms. Harrison.
I just wanted to go over the election petition question. Who votes? Would you go over that part?
Landowners and registered electors, registered voters within the property to be annexed are the ones who vote on that. So it tends to be a larger property with more owners. So it's a little harder to count noses before you decide which process to undertake. But if you can't get the 50%, it's still possible to bring that forward and have a vote within the area to be annexed.
So it is within that area to be annexed, not surrounding areas or, so it's just that area? Okay, thank you.
So to clarify it, to piggyback off that question, so that is an opportunity for that requested piece of property to get its say with the jurisdiction that it wants to be annexed, or if there's a denial by the municipality, say we denied it, then how does that work? Would they go back and say, well, we want to try to do this? And
Well, I'm not sure if there's if the sequence of events has happened. I haven't heard about it, but there is the 1 year sort of waiting period following a denied petition for annexation. Whether you wait the 1 year to undertake an annexation election, we just have to take a look and see. I didn't try to address that question, but.
okay, all right, Ms. Franks.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. Wanted to, if you could kind of flip back to some of the early slides, I wanted to understand, kind of go through a few things. The community of interest, I wanted to understand what that means. Urbanized and integrated, I'm pretty sure I've got a decent idea, but what does that mean, community of interest?
There has to be some finding, again, in the absence, well, again, you can't have the absence of contiguity, but assuming the contiguity is there, it is presumed, but again, not finally concluded, that there is a common ground, that there is a reason why the two bodies of land, the city is one and the annexed property is the other, should be in the same jurisdiction. Maybe the uses that are in that area currently are, or the standards or the sort of typical property uses are similar to what's adjacent in the city, and not at all similar to what's on the other sides of that property. So it's just there's no strict finding that must be made. It's just that there's a commonality here that warrants considering the annexation.
Is community defined in any way? Is it a legal definition? Because that, I see it as one. I'm just trying to understand what community means, because it doesn't mean the landowners and some other I guess who does community mean?
I don't think it's community in the sense that we think of a neighborhood or
a
town or a city. It's more of a commonality. It's a consistency or as you would look in a zoning case for the compatibility of uses. You're looking for some sort of compatibility between the annexed property and the city.
Great. Could you, it was a few slides, I guess. It was said something about 20 acres or more, same landowner, dollar figure. Wanted to understand, yeah, I see it. Wanted to understand what that looks like from let's say you've got a piece of land to annex. It's 100 acres in total. Somebody owns 40 and the other person owns 60. How does that fit into this equation here?
I think whatever the combination of ownership is in a particular application, there cannot be one owner of 20 acres or more with that value as a component, as the annexed property. I think the other properties around it that don't have that commonality could pursue annexation, but.
And is that on the assessor's value? Is that the assessed value?
It is by statute. It is the assessed value. Yeah.
Okay. Regarding the impact report, which we said was the city's responsibility, that through agreement they could require the applicant to prepare, are there any guidelines, parameters, ordinances, or anything that controls the metrics for that study? Basically, we've all, studies can, be slanted to prove that. Are there anything that guides that to remove that bias, that potential bias, I should say?
It's left pretty broadly as to what can be considered and how that study can be conducted. The city can determine what issues need to be covered in that report and how it should be structured. There's prior history to look at, but and the statute does have some a little bit of defining language in it, and I'd be happy to refer to it. I don't have it committed to memory, but.
I just know when we were having the traffic impact in the 2090 area that maybe the study wasn't done at the time in which it was the times were that of most concern to the residents. So I wanted to ask about that. What provisions or any kind of rules or surrounding that potentially you would be inheriting special taxing districts or other agreements that would be already part of those land agreements? What does that process look like? Do they become up for renegotiation? Do you have to inherit them in their entire body of information?
Good question. I think the preliminary answer is it depends on the specific language in the agreement and whether it is subject to be assigned or taken over by another party. But as a general rule, if there are ongoing agreements that are not precluded from being assigned, they would be the city's responsibility, assuming that they are sort of government obligations in the first place. Now, if there's a district in place and that district overlaps the annexed property, that district is still going to remain. It doesn't go away because the boundary of the city changes.
And with regards to the slide that talked about the zoning within 90 days, is that Colorado statute-driven, city charter, or municipal code-driven, or could that time frame be extended in order to decouple those things?
It is by statute. We'd have to look at whether there's discretion or the ability to override that. I don't believe there's any language in that provision that says 90 days unless, or 90 days, but it can be extended. But it's still possible to zone the property after that time frame. It's just that if a building permit were to come in that is inconsistent with the zoning that the council wants to see on that property, you may not be able to stop it if the 90 days has passed.
Thanks. Regarding the special notices, and we certainly have guidelines of how those have to be done, but we now know that many people don't get their news through traditional sources, and I guess I'm questioning whether we can. There's no limit on how many things we can do to get the information out there. It's just what the minimum. Is that correct? So in order, if there were this potential annexation, which is for the subject property that was talked about earlier, we wouldn't be limited in those notices. It would just simply be what's the minimum notice we can provide.
It's a simplified process because it's a simplified situation. But consider this, that one of the things that the statute says is for an enclave or municipally owned land, there's no requirement for notice of public hearing. Well, we hold public hearings on all ordinances anyway, and the same notice provisions would apply to that type of ordinance as to any other. So effectively, there'd be the same notice required.
I'm down to 2 questions. So we talked about that if they were denied, an applicant was denied for an annexation, they'd have to basically a 1-year waiting period. But I'm wondering, can they just slice and dice it slightly differently, cleave off one piece of land and come back, or does it have to materially change to some level of threshold in order to reapply with the same rough land areas?
Well, considering it's an annexation restriction as opposed to a zoning restriction, in the zoning context, you really can have that situation where a rezoning request is denied and the applicant comes back with a slightly different set of uses or a different zone district, but it's very similar, and you have to look at that and think, is that really a different application or isn't it? With the annexation, you're talking about the same land. If it's a sliver here or a sliver there, it may not have any impact on on whether it's the same property or not. If that one parcel is now part of a much larger parcel, you probably have to consider that a new application. But each situation would be a little bit different, and we'd have to confront it as it came along. But keeping in mind that the intent of the law is to limit to that 1-year period. That would be the guiding principle in making that determination.
And the last thing was that there was a slide that talked about being able to incorporate like the philosophy of the comprehensive plan, or which, including things like for the health, safety, and welfare, quality of life factors. And you talked about how once that's in there, it may, you may get unintended consequences, but it would simply just be another ordinance to remove that if you found that was being overly restrictive. So we could seek to do something to kind of marry up our sustainability and comprehensive plans and those types of plans into there, or specific verbiage, and not harm us in the long term if we found that to be overly restrictive. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. Those are all topics that could be covered in a policy type ordinance. And you're right, if anything doesn't fit after the first or second annexation, that's certainly something that the council could review by ordinance as well.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate Annexation 101 because I learned a lot. Thanks.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Some of my questions were already answered. Thank you, Barb. Thank you, Tim. I do have a few things. One of the early slides, you talked about a majority petition, and
It's a shorthand to illustrate that it's the petition that requires a majority of the owners of land within the area to be annexed and a majority of the land. So if you have 10 people own property within the area to be annexed, you need at least more than 5 of them to have a majority of the land owners. And if it's 10 acres of land, and I'm just using simple numbers, you need to have at least more than 5 of the acres represented by that ownership. So not everybody has to be on the petition, but more than half of the owners do, and they have to represent the ownership of more than half the land within that area. So that's where the majority comes from.
okay. So it's the perimeter then is the land to be annexed.
Right. Within that property, very often you're going to have one owner come forward with an annexation, but that's not always the case. So if you have multiple owners, you need to meet those 2 thresholds, or your petition won't go anywhere.
Okay. At one point, you mentioned that land can be urbanized. Is there a definition for what urbanized means in this context?
There may be some that have been discussed in the case law. It's been the standard in the statute for many years, and now that with the adoption of the constitutional amendment in 1980, I believe that's when the 50-50 rule came into play, and the community of interest and the urbanization and all of that, when those became requirements but were presumed to exist if you had the contiguity, there's been a lot less discussion about what those terms mean, because if you have the 1/6 contiguity, you probably have met those other requirements. There are specific requirements, and I can be glad to pull them up. There are 3 provisions that if the council were to find, I believe it's any 2 of those 3 exist, that's what undoes the presumption that the first 3 are there. So you file your petition, you got the 1/6 contiguity, you're entitled to a presumption that the community of interest exists, that the land is capable of being urbanized, and that there is a ability to integrate the new property into the city. Those are presumed to exist. But the council can look at these 3 other factors, which are sort of anti-annexation factors, negative factors, that if 2 of them exist, that undoes the presumption, and now it's fair game as to whether the community of interest exists, whether that urbanization is capable. But it's does this property fit within a city as opposed to being something more rural? Does the property integrate with the city? That's the general theme of those requirements.
Is it fair to ask, does that include density type issues?
Oh, sure, absolutely. The proposed uses on the property and the amount of density is going to be a factor in any annexation and zoning.
Also, there was talk about the cost for the report, and the applicant pays the cost. Typically, what is the cost?
Oh, I don't know if there's a typical amount. I imagine that varies from community to community, but it's whatever the city wants to be included in that report, we can require it to be in that report.
Okay.
It's not so different from traffic studies and things that are done in zoning cases. Just it's a broader area of study, so it can get more expensive as you add more provisions to it. But.
And may we please get a copy of the slides?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of things. First is kind of connecting the dots in the Charter, Article 9.1b. It says the Planning Commission shall advise council on annexations. But then it never says what how council handles this. Where does that piece of the pie come from?
Well, I think typically because it's going to be hand in hand with the zoning, I mean, the planning commission needs to review the zoning. So to have the planning commission review the annexation at the same time, it should track so that they both go forward to the decision-making public hearing before the council.
My point is that in the rest of the charter, it doesn't mention how council handles annexations. So is that from state law, or is that in ordinance, or?
Well, the process by which council makes the final decision on an ordinance for annexation is state law, and then the planning commission requirement would go along with that.
Thank you. Need to kind of dance around this a little bit because there's a possibility it might be, instead of theory, a more solid case, but the municipal satellite description. If we were to annex an area that is part of another municipal entity, and it left no contiguity between two pieces of that same municipal entity, would that create a municipal satellite? Would it create an enclave? And if so, can we, 3 years later, annex somebody else's municipal property? Or
There is first of all, thanks for mentioning that, because we had not talked about, I didn't intend to talk much about disconnection, but I did mean to say that only unincorporated property can be annexed into a municipality. So in the hypothetical that you used, the property is in another municipality. It must first go through the disconnection process with that municipality to become part of the unincorporated county before it can be eligible for annexation into a different municipality. There is a provision in the statute that provides for judicial review, at least when there's a satellite created. The idea is that you should not create that situation where you've disconnected a piece of property and then annexed it to the other city, leaving that island or that satellite all by itself. So I don't think you ever get to the point of deciding whether to annex that enclave 3 years hence, because it shouldn't exist in the first place. Honestly, I've never seen that applied, so I'm just presuming that would be the outcome, that the annexation disconnection might be considered invalid because of the outcome of the satellite existing.
okay, thank you. I think that covers it. You did a very good presentation.
Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this information. And most of my questions have already been answered, but a couple more. About the impact report. So as a council, we would get to define what items would be examined in this impact report,
Right. And
impact study.
it could be a matter of policy, or it could be dictated at the time of the substantial compliance finding.
Okay. And then, and we also would get to decide who would conduct this study.
Yes, you have the ability to require the applicant to pay for it, and I would believe that we could dictate it has to be certified consultant in whatever areas we're dealing with. I don't know that we would dictate a particular.
I guess my concern would be that if, I think we would want to have the developers pay for that, but if we didn't also get to have some say over who was doing it, then there could be a question of whether or not it was impartial. And
Right. I think what you'd want to do is direct that it be conducted by a reputable, licensed, whatever requirements that might exist, and, that it be someone with no connection to the applicant. We could define the language as carefully as we needed to.
perfect. And then and I don't know if there are examples where we got these kinds of impact studies in the past, but for annexations, but once we get it 25 days in advance, how would we be able to get it out to the public? Are there
There are additional, it's due in that 25-day time period. There are additional time periods that it has to be presented and distributed as well. So it's built into the public hearing timing process.
Okay, great. And I guess, what are the means that we've gotten them out in the past and information out? Do we use just the website, or?
The Taylor property being the only annexation in memory, I
Yeah.
don't recall whether there was an annexation impact report on that one, and
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't remember if there
Okay.
was one, how it was distributed, but we use
Great.
whatever means are available.
Okay, thank you.
And the notification process for the neighborhoods in that area as well.
Yeah.
All that standard notification took place.
Okay, awesome. And then another question about annexation agreements. What are some examples of things that have gone into annexation agreements? Additionally, in addition to the zoning.
Right. Really an endless variety of restrictions. Annexation being legislative, there are things that the city could require as conditions that you wouldn't normally have the ability to consider. So those kinds of provisions could be in the annexation agreement. Talked about the zoning and how that process gets completed and what it results in. It, again, recognizing that there are a couple of schools of thought on that process. Timetables that aren't already addressed in the process. If you didn't have an ordinance or a policy setting forth specific timeframes for review by staff or referral out to other agencies, that could all be done as part of the agreement. Things like utilities, if the annexing city is to be providing utility service to the property, you would set forth an annexation agreement, how long the applicant had before the property had to be connected to the utilities. So those kinds of things as well.
And what about additional fees or impact fees, open space requirements? Are there examples of times when those kinds of things have been included in annexation agreements?
I'll say this, if there have, it would be based on a showing of an impact. If there's if the annexation impact report shows that there would be a significant impact in an area, then you could include something like that as long as the fee or the charge was, reasonable in nature and scope and extent to the impact that's been defined.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and I guess the last question is about the quasi-judicial. And, in practicality, it's difficult and I would say frustrating for the citizens if there's a annexation and a zoning. And so, I guess can we discuss the annexation of an of not a specific case here, but without talking about the zoning?
It is possible to talk about the impact of a particular piece of property, the size of it, the location of it. It's possible to discuss that. Once you start getting into, I think you should vote against it. Why? Well, because we don't need more, and you end up almost inevitably talking about the uses. Mm-hmm. But remember this about the quasi-judicial instructions that we try to offer whenever a zoning case comes along. You may find yourself in a situation that you can't avoid, where you didn't see it coming, and you find yourself suddenly being asked about a project that's in the pipeline coming up for public hearing. It's not the first line of defense, but if you find that you've had a conversation with somebody and it's about that project and about the zoning aspect of that project, you have the ability to come to the public hearing and say, hey, on X date, I had this phone conversation or whatever with this individual, and here's what they said. And I'm sharing that now with the rest of council. Mm-hmm. If it's an email, you can have it delivered to everybody so that all of you have the same information. And then the key is, if you all now have the same information and the same persuasive power as that statement or comment might have had for you, if you can say that you can objectively proceed and listen to the evidence and consider it and vote on it, notwithstanding that one conversation, then you can proceed in that fashion. So I'm not encouraging anybody to talk about quasi-judicial matters while they're pending before the council, but recognizing that the higher the level of interest in a case, the more likely it is someone's going to want to talk to you about it. You do have a sort of a safeguard, a fallback position there.
Great, thank you. I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Counselor Wickman.
I think all my questions have been asked, but I want to flesh them out a little bit, make sure I've understood what's been said. I'll just start off with Dana's last question about the pairing of annexation and zonings. Who makes that determination whether they're lumped together or not? I know you say traditionally it's done that way, but what if I don't like the tradition? Who's going to make that decision that they're together, or do we have the power? Can we make the decision right now to separate the two?
It is ultimately the decision of the applicant, but just as staff, planning staff works with zoning applicants to say, you've got a problem with this provision of the comprehensive plan, and if it goes forward, we can't recommend approval. If staff says it would be advisable to have the two treated together rather than separately, the applicant has to consider that as a sort of warning that it might not be received as favorably, but that's true of any part of a zoning application. There's a sort of not negotiated, but a discussion of which parts might be vulnerable and what the applicant should do to firm them up. If it's important to staff, or the staff believes it's important to have them heard together, they will advise that, but they can't require it, and it's ultimately up to the applicant.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is if the applicant or somebody decides that it's advantageous to them to tie it together, to kind of tie our hands on talking about it, the applicant can come in and say, I'm tying together, and now my hands are tied, now I can't talk about it. They make that decision for me?
No, because here's the thing about that, Counselor. It's if they come in together, then yeah, you're subject to that restriction. But ultimately, they still have to meet all the city's requirements for the zoning, and they have to satisfy you on the annexation as well. And you have every opportunity at the public hearing to ask as many questions and dig as far into the application as you want. And so it's not really any different from another zoning situation.
Well, it sounds like they're really going to tie my hands on my contact, with my constituents, is what I'm hearing.
Well, again, consider what an annexation is. It's a piece of land that is contiguous to the city, and it's not part of the city, and the owner wants to make it part of the city. In the simplest form, that's what it comes down to. What can you say about that request? You don't want the city to get bigger on that side, where you like the shape it is. I mean, frankly, I'm being a little facetious, but after talking about how big the land is, what kind of topography it has, where it's located, what existing roads connect to it or could connect to it, there's only so much you can say about the annexation without getting into the zoning proposal, without getting into what the uses are, what the density is going to be, what the other standards are going to be. So you inevitably would drift into that zoning discussion. But as much as you want and are able to talk about the annexation in a vacuum, you're able to do that. Just as if you separated them, if the annexation is being heard separate from the zoning, you can only talk about the annexation you can only talk about the zoning in the zoning process because it's quasi-judicial. The annexation, whether it's separate or attached, you still have the same ability to talk about the annexation, just that there's not that much that you can discuss without straying into the other area.
So the answer to my question, who decides? The applicant decides whether they're linked together or not.
Ultimately, if the application is brought forward and there's some reason why the council, I suppose the planning commission could recommend it as well, but some reason why it's not working well combined, I believe the council could have the ability to vote to continue or table one or the other and separate them out. There has to be some reason why you'd be doing that. And at that point, it's time for the public hearing and the decision, anyway. There's not really any further opportunity to discuss the two separately.
So you're saying I could bring it to council to separate them?
I believe that if there's certainly if there's a recommendation from the planning commission that here's a reason why these two didn't go together, but also if in the course of the hearing if there was a reason why council believed that they should be separated, I don't think you're precluded from doing that. It is encouraged to have them come together because of the requirement that you do them within 90 days, do the zoning within 90 days, and it's not as efficient to have two public hearing processes. But if the council believes that they should be heard separately, I believe you have the power to do that once you're in the public hearing process by way of motion.
Can you hold on, please?
If you want to be a quickie, I don't mind interruption. I'll keep going.
I guess what I'm hearing is if we separate them or don't separate them, it doesn't change what we can say about the annexation. Because I agree, it's awkward to not be able to talk about it.
Right.
And if that had the effect of allowing us to talk about it, that would be something to think about. But it sounds to me like it doesn't really change anything.
I'm not sure that in practice it would change anything. But again, I'm not contemplating a reason why council might say, hey, this one should be separated. I'm just making the observation that I believe you'd have the ability to do that in the public hearing process. But I don't know that it would make any difference in being able
So
to
you're
talk
saying
about the case.
you think it might make a difference if we did it in a different way?
I can't think of a reason why it would change what the scope of what you could talk about in the annexation proposal versus the zoning proposal.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so it sounds like you're going to impose a quasi-judicial. Okay, things that were brought up before, the metro districts. And we have situations where there's already metro districts on the properties that we're looking at annexing. Is there any way we can modify those rather than accepting them entirely as is?
As we've seen, special districts, including metropolitan districts, once formed, are fairly autonomous and subject to only specific oversight by the city. There's nothing in the statute that says you'd have the power upon taking jurisdiction over land that is within the service area of a special district. I don't believe there's anything in the statute that says that we can unilaterally change that service plan that's been approved. If the result of the annexation and zoning was that the service plan needed to be modified, that would come through the council. But I don't think you can initiate something to require a special district to do something different with their service area. There would obviously be some opportunity to understand exactly what that district provided. One of the reasons to talk about annexing property is if it's capable of being served by municipal services. And if those services are already being provided by another entity, that might be a reason why it doesn't get annexed. That's part of the analysis.
And if the property is already in another jurisdiction and it already has a zoning from that jurisdiction, how binding is that previous jurisdiction's decision versus can we entirely rezone it and completely differently?
The application is, assuming again that it's the combined application, it's going to come to you saying we want to annex this property in, and we've got the contiguity, and we've got the other requirements, and here's the zoning we want, just as any rezoning applicant would come in with a requested zone district. It wouldn't necessarily be the same or similar to what is on it in the other jurisdiction, remembering that by the time this comes to you, they've already disconnected from that other jurisdiction.
Well, I have a question there. I know we're assuming that there's going to be this simultaneous disconnect, zoning, annex. We're assuming everything's all coming together for convenience and all that sort of stuff. But is that a requirement that everything has to be all packaged like that? Can the disconnect be separate and then the annexation be separate? And the zoning, do we have to lump everything together?
They actually, I mean, if the zoning and annexation are not combined, then they are separate processes coming before this council. The disconnection goes to the governing body of the current jurisdiction. And I know we looked at this some time ago. It is not prohibited from starting an annexation process, not expressly prohibited from starting an annexation process in the city that would annex before the disconnection is done in the other city. But if the disconnection is denied in the first jurisdiction, then it's not eligible to be annexed into the second city anyway. So that has to be done before you can annex the property. It has to be in an unincorporated county jurisdiction.
Okay, well, in general terms, yeah, it has to be done, but sometimes this as done is essentially instantaneous. So it's all going on at the same moment, and
Yeah, that wouldn't be possible here to have it simultaneous. You'd have to have the disconnection completed, and I mean, you could try to schedule things so that if you anticipate a decision on that on X date, you schedule your hearings for whatever time after that is appropriate. But it's not. The only thing that's required is that the disconnection be completed before the property can be considered for annexation.
can the disconnect be dependent upon or contingent upon we doing the annexation?
I believe it could. What you're talking about is you got jurisdiction A or city A disconnecting a piece of land into county that we'll call C for ultimate annexation into the other city that's B. I believe if the ultimate goal of the owner is to annex into that city B, they can request the disconnection from A, subject to the ultimate annexation into B, because the county, the unincorporated county, was just a necessary stopover. If that's not where they ultimately want to be, they can proceed with the annexation, and I believe the applicant could make that conditional. We'd have to see it in the
On the impact studies, Dana asked a lot of questions and you answered most of that. But I'm very concerned about that. From the experience we had with Morrison and Rooney Valley, we do know that people can do the study, and the study can be so biased and slanted as to really not be useful for our perspective. And I know you did say that we could choose whoever the studier is, and we could make them pay for it. But there were two things you told us. You said earlier in the process that the applicant can do it, and then later on there was like we can do it. And so there are like two parties that can do it, and of course I'm looking to make sure that we have a party that we can trust, and we don't go through that whole Morrison thing again.
Right. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. What the statute says is that at least 25 days before the public hearing, the to be annexing jurisdiction, I don't want to presume anything. So the city in which the property would be annexed must prepare and file a report. Over the course of the years, it has become common practice, pretty much standard practice, to require the applicant to do that. It's either dealt with in an annexation agreement or at the time of the resolution of substantial compliance. And you can ask for whatever qualifications you think are necessary to do that study. And if they don't come back with it, they bring something that's not objective and that's not thorough and that's not comprehensive. That can be a factor in the ultimate decision. But you can dictate what the study should look like and what kind of entity should conduct it.
Okay. All right, and the final question. This one I just didn't understand at all, even though it's been asked. On the limits of eligibility, the 20 acres or more. Say, what? We're talking about an annexation here like 300 acres. On its face, if it's 300 acres, it's more than 20 acres. That would seem to say there's a limitation. So I just don't understand that at all.
And this is the way it's written, and it's under common ownership. So whether it has to be a single parcel, it's an odd requirement. And I know what you're saying. If you have a bigger piece of land and one applicant, you probably have to look at whether they are all under the common ownership or whether the parcels are held in different entities. It's the common ownership that sets that prohibition there. And I'll be honest with you, I did not spend any time trying to research how that has been applied in practice. It's just included on the list of limitations.
Well, I have to confess, that one surprised me. I did not know about that one at all. And I'm going, hey, that kind of is affecting where we're at right now.
I'd be happy to look into that further, see how it's been applied, if it has, and how it's been discussed in some of the treatises and such on this topic. So I can report
I
back.
think that one's important.
Mr. Cox, so on the topic of special districts, a special district would supersede a municipality taking over the land mass of that. So what I'm getting at is that wouldn't equal a major modification to their service plan?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, so if there was an annexation that incorporated a special district that was already existing,
Right.
that annexation wouldn't create a major modification to their service plan?
Well, if they're going to continue to serve the same service area they serve now, it's just partially or entirely in a different jurisdiction. I don't know.
That would trigger.
Remember that the material modification language in Title 32 is of the including but not limited to nature. So you can make an argument that being brought into a different jurisdiction with different rules would constitute a material modification, but I'm not sure it's ever been presented that way.
And deed restrictions, do those stay relevant?
Zoning and jurisdiction in annexation doesn't have any impact on language in a deed,
Thank you.
recorded deed.
Councilor Harrison.
Thank you. This is fantastic, and I love all the questions that everybody's asking. Two questions. First one is, if we created any kind of a regular ordinance regarding annexation, can we include in there the specific requirement that when it comes on board that it's always an R143? So that what that would do is that's our largest parcels of land, and then to have any smaller parcels sold, they'd have to come back through a regular zoning change. Is that possible?
That's a very good question, because when I talked about the annexation agreements and the questions about the ability to say, thou shalt zone it this way, the question is, doing that as part of the process, is that a legitimate zoning exercise? What you're talking about
It's a package deal.
is saying before you even walk in the door, you need to know that this is the only zoning designation we'll allow. We'd have to look at that, because if you don't even know what an applicant's going to propose and you decide not to, or have a policy that says you will not approve any such annexation under those circumstances, that
I'm thinking
could
of
be
it
issues.
is the possibility of a two-step process, giving us a definition of really large lots on an annexation question, that would be kind of part and parcel. And then if that annexation would pass, then they could come in for it, because you said we could have separate annexation versus zoning question. Then they would have to come back in for the second step, and that is to rezone to a smaller parcel or whatever.
It may be possible, because when you talk about the 90-day requirement to zone the property post-annexation, what you're trying to mitigate against is an undesirable zone district being automatically attached to that property because you didn't do it. So you can, I believe, in an annexation agreement, require that a zoning process be completed, or perhaps that in the absence of if the annexation and zoning are not done together, that the property would be zoned whichever district at the outset. We just have to work through the procedural steps to make sure we weren't depriving anybody of due process on a zoning application.
Okay, and then my second question, thank you. Why don't we have more annexations into the city of Lakewood? We have several enclaves throughout, and I'm not, please let me go on record, I am not supporting that. I'm just asking the question, why has that not happened in the past?
Well, any property that's an enclave is going to be subject to an analysis of whether it's a good decision for the city. Since you can do it unilaterally, you don't have to wait to see what somebody else proposes. You can say, we're going to take that through the process. As a general rule, when you're talking about strictly residential property, not typically a good deal for the city, because it tends, the general formula is it costs more to provide services to residential than it does than you bring in tax revenue. So that's kind of a consideration when it's a residential property. Beyond that, you look at a lot of different factors as to whether to annex an enclave. As far as more annexations outside of the city, I think you get a situation where a significant amount of the city's boundary is another municipality, and those are not eligible unless they've been disconnected. So it's really a limited supply of land, or limited areas where there's land that could be eligible for annexation.
Thank you.
And Lockwood doesn't want to be Lakewood. Mr. Habel.
Before the Taylor property, I believe our last annexation was Circuit City. Mr. Cohen might remember that one. And at the time, the question came up about the community benefit. It seems that our ordinance requires there is a community benefit or a social benefit to an annexation.
Mm-hmm.
How, in general, do annexations benefit my neighbor Lois, who lives in the middle of Lakewood?
It's a good question. I don't think that there is a requirement that it benefit everybody, but as a general principle that it's a good thing for the city. That's the threshold that would have to be met, I guess.
And how do you determine that? I mean, what is that? Just something pejorative that each of us have to mull over in our own minds, or is there some applicable rule that shows a benefit?
No, again, you have such unrestricted discretion in these situations that you listen to the testimony at a public hearing, and various people are going to say yay on this or nay on that, and who's more persuasive, and that's how you're going to make those determinations. Plus, the impact report is going to address some of those issues as to, if all the impacts are negative, then it's hard to find there's going to be a beneficial fallout for the city.
I remember when Circuit City came on into the city, I asked our planning director what that social or community benefit was, and he said, so people can shop. The 20 acres or more, I have always read that as meaning that if I'm in the middle of an area that my neighbors want to have annexed, and I have 20 acres or more, then I can say, they can't drag me along kicking and screaming into the annexation. I have to be excluded. Is that?
Not in so many words, you've hit on the missing phrase that I realized I had not included there. Without the owner's consent.
So if I don't want to go and I have 20 acres or more, then I don't go.
Yes.
But other than that, there's no 20-acre limit or exclusion.
That's exactly right. If you can't include 20 acres or more, even if you have the 50% or more of the overall owners and the overall land mass, without that owner's consent, you can't compel them to be part of the annexation.
Thank you.
Ms. Franks.
My first ask is before you send that to us, and we're going to propagate that out, that we get that bullet point fixed. The next thing is, and I guess this is more to reiterate why it's so helpful to get these well ahead of time. While we've been sitting here, I have researched that whole triad, I'll call it the community of interest, the urbanization, and the integration piece. And if I'm connecting the right dots, and I'm here to say that I'm not sure I'm connecting them because I'm reading quickly, it appears to be that in order to say that it doesn't meet that, there's specific criteria. You have to meet 2 of those in order to basically say that this doesn't. So it's not an arbitrary, it doesn't. It seems to be there's very specific rules around that. And what I would like you to research, not something I need you to respond to tonight, is it appears that someone proposed a bill in the 61st General Assembly in which they were trying to reduce the number of criteria from 2 to 1, and they were trying to add a factor demonstrating that the no community of interest could be met as a threshold by the adjacent property owners not wanting that. So that would be the folks that abut that property. I just want us to make sure that somehow those didn't, in that 10-year gap, some of that language make it in there in some way or shape or form that I'm not researching correctly here. So,
We'll make sure that.
so let's make sure we know what that excludes piece or what that looks like.
I mentioned those three criteria a little while ago, but didn't have them committed to memory. But you're right. If you find two of those three,
Yeah.
that overcomes the presumption that the
Yeah.
others exist. Doesn't mean that they don't exist. There still could be evidence that the community of interest is there, but it would have to overcome that.
And it's very defined. It looks very specified in that. But like I said, that attempt roughly 10 years ago to get some additional language which would change that up was in that bill. And I just want to make sure that somehow that didn't get crossed over because it looks of interest to me.
We'll do that.
Great. All right. Mr. Cox, thank you very much. Appreciate that presentation, and we will get that all updated and make sure we get that out onto the web. So now I'll reopen public comment on the presentation that you saw, Sustainability Awards or Annexation Information. And first up, I have Steve Singla. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Steve Snegla. I recently moved to the Green Mountain Summit neighborhood, and as a result, I'm very interested in Lakewood politics. So it was a very informative presentation. I'd like to thank Mr. Cox for putting it all together. And also, before I begin on annexation, to thank the mayor, the council, and the city of Lakewood for perpetuating and keeping the sustainability program going. Is something that not only our community needs, but our state and our entire country. As far as annexation is concerned, I know there's a lot of concerns about people and the changing of their neighborhoods and the different view they might see someday, and what that might entail. But the cautionary tale I'd like to relate is, as not a native of Colorado, and I know that might not score me some points with the people in this room, but we're all citizens of the United States, and I come from a very similar place in New York. Upstate New York is farm and dairy land and a smaller community. And for years, many of the residents fought development, and they didn't think about what that meant to their community. And I saw, within a 20-year span, in my own lifetime, it go from a vibrant community that had enough money to pay for itself to a virtual reality community, and many people like myself leaving and going somewhere else where services and affordable housing and fun and other things that are part of the community, not just a good view, are also available. So when we talk about annexation, yes, we have to ask ourselves the question, what benefit does it bring to Lakewood? But also, what does it mean for the future of Lakewood? And for the people like myself who want to be residents of Lakewood, who have bought a home here and made an investment in the community, and are trying to make a bigger investment by standing here and talking to you, what's our future? What do we get? I mean, what can we do to make this the best decision, or if it's not the right decision at all, to not do it? Thank you.
Great, thank you, and welcome. We're glad you're here. Alan, did you want to speak again? Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm still Alan Heald. Hello, everybody. I appreciate those comments. I see that any annexation will obviously require city services from Lakewood, and I'm curious about the process, about at what point along this curve is an evaluation of the cost, actual physical cost to Lakewood done, and how does that, inform the whole timeline of a cost benefits analysis. I mean, I understand that the report is done by the applicant, and that the city of Lakewood, as I understand it, can stipulate what is to be in that report. So that's good. And of course, we're relying on you to ask the hard questions, such as the cost benefits analysis that's been mentioned. My concern is that somehow through annexation, the city becomes obligated to provide services without the revenue. As Mr. Cox said, and I think we all know, retail doesn't pay. I think that's pretty common knowledge. So my concern is how that gets factored, that reality gets factored into a decision and what the process is behind it. So I urge you not to rush the process. Annexation is a big deal. It has far-reaching consequences. And so I think if we demand, we need factual justification for the decisions that are made. And we need appropriate time for council to have all the information and time to evaluate it, and for the public as well, so that we can provide substantive comments, not just angry comments. Anyway, once the facts are known, which is a big process, then I suggest taking a very simple approach to the decision. If the burden of annexation exceeds the benefits of annexation, don't do it. If you don't have enough analysis to determine whether or not the benefits and burdens work out in our favor, don't do it. It is that simple. You know, there's no reason to rush a decision. And we trust you to make a responsible decision on this. And we are watching, we are trying to work with you. And we want you to please remember, you know, that you work for us. Our future is in your hands. As voters, your future is in our hands. We're all in this together. So let's work together for the benefit of Lakewood. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you. Ms. Marr? Good evening. Welcome.
My name is Connie Marr, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and how exciting it was to see your enthusiasm for the sustainability accomplishments and awards. We saw many great examples tonight. And one thing I would like to state is that what is not sustainable is our current coding, housing coding, where we allow unlimited housing density in any new development. This is something that must be changed before any land is even considered to be annexed. This was a travesty established by city leaders prior to your being on the council and being our mayor, but this is something that you can change. We ask you to do that so that our city can truly be sustainable. And today I thought of a few examples that kind of help us picture high density and sustainability. And one of them was, if I have a pasture, a fenced pasture with cows, horses, if I allow an unlimited number in that pasture, whether it's cows, horses, whatever, eventually there will be not enough food, not enough water. They will starve, they will die. Another example, more human related, is an elevator. Every elevator has a maximum capacity. There are many good reasons for that. If we exceed that capacity, at a minimum, the elevator won't function as well. It might run slow, it might stop between floors. But at the worst, we could have a catastrophic failure and people die. It's a public safety issue. So what I'm trying to say is allowing unlimited housing is also a public safety issue, can lead to catastrophic failures. It's a detriment to the quality of our life, the quality of our health. So I encourage you to pursue true sustainability and change our city code so that we no longer have unlimited density, so that all new developments include building requirements that follow the example of the cityscape at Belmar. I mean, that was just, touched my heart when I heard that. But we need that in all of the city, every single new development, not just that one small one in Belmar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Amara? Sure.
Good evening. I'm Ray Mulholland from live on 868 South Elkhart Street, and I've got just a couple of comments. It's about my bedtime, so I'm going to make it short. when you consider the annexation, you must consider the cost-benefit ratio of the annexation. Does the cost of annexation exceed the benefit to the city? If it does, then don't annex it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mara?
Good evening, all. Thank you once again for allowing me to speak. I'd like to support and echo Mr. Heald's comments and all the points that he made. My comments are if you do vote on an annexation, and if a majority on this council, which is 6 individual people, decides to make a major annexation to the city. So therefore, I propose the following. Whereas Lakewood City Council is considering voting to annex properties for residential development into Lakewood now and possibly in the future. And whereas residential development is widely proven to place net costs and burdens on any municipality, whereas considerable and consistent concern has been raised by the citizens of Lakewood during 2016 and 2017 about such annexations, whereas the City Council is considering moving forward on such votes without existing resources to accommodate such expansion, the cart before the horse scenario. Specifically, Lakewood lacking the school facilities and classroom space to accommodate additional students to the city's schools and wards where annexations are being considered. Jeffco's school budgets for the foreseeable future do not exist to expand the school system within Lakewood and accommodate such additional residential expansion capacity. Lakewood infrastructure of roads, transportation, and traffic are already heavily burdened, congested, and decades behind needed infrastructure updates. Lakewood support services, admitted by the police and the fire departments themselves, are already understaffed, not having caught up with existing buildup. Lakewood utilities, as serviced by XL, do not exist to include added capacity in some areas currently being proposed for annexation, with XL saying they do not wish to make additional capital investment at this time for such, therefore laying possible unfair burdens and inadequacies of an overtaxed utility grid on existing citizens. In some annexation proposals, there is no local water to provide for the additional housing, while arrangements are said to be made by outside private water companies and outside sources. Such planning is a risky proposition for the health, harmony, and peace of the community to add residential communities that have no local water source and privately run water companies. There are other impacts that many people mentioned last fall that I won't go into at this point. But I would like to state there is no empirical evidence anywhere in this country that residential annexations reduce housing prices. And lastly, such annexations under the above considerations have a negative impact on existing citizens' rights, financial burdens, and our participation in and enjoyment of the Lakewood community in which we have invested. Therefore, and this is not taking away anything from what you do, this comes after what you do. I propose that the City Council vote to pass an ordinance where no annexation to the City of Lakewood of 15 acres or more that has been voted on and approved by the Lakewood City Council may be implemented or considered final without being ratified by the citizens of Lakewood. Such a vote to the people shall take place by mail-in ballot to all registered Lakewood voters not less than 100 days from the date the City Council votes for annexation. Within 7 days of such vote for annexation by City Council, a direct mail announcement is to be mailed to all registered voters and registered businesses in Lakewood. This official mailed announcement, written by the City of Lakewood, is to include the detailed annexation plan and proposal for any development contained therein. This is to allow adequate notice, discussion, and review by the citizens of Lakewood and those who may be impacted by such or any annexations. The City of Lakewood will also publicly disclose any and all proposed annexations prominently on its website homepage within 7 calendar days of the receipt of the requested annexations proposal,
Immediately include the announcement that such a proposal has been received, including its details in any newsletters or community print media Lakewood currently publishes. And all city councilors will hold at least one Saturday ward meeting devoted exclusively to allowing
Wrap up your
citizens
comments, please. Your time's up.
to discuss the proposed annexation. The cost of putting forth such a mail-in ballot before the people, including the cost of this announcement initially, shall be paid for in full in advance of each mailing by the property owner or developer requesting the annexation. I have more details on this. I'd be happy to submit to you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll now close public comment and go to reports. So my reports, this Sunday we have the marathon, the Colfax Marathon. So look for road closures all along West Colfax. And if you have to get around, check out the maps prior. I think you can find them on our website as to what is closed, what is open. I want to thank the Two Creeks neighborhood and Maddie Nichols and all the folks in 40 West for taking their Saturday morning to go clean up West Colfax, which is always an interesting, fun time for folks who get to do that. And I'd also like to thank the IBER folks for coming out and participating in a historical survey this last Saturday. A couple folks were out and got to see some pretty cool pictures of the IBER neighborhood prior to development. And I think, Ms. Hodson, you're going to touch on some of the hail damage, so I'll just wait on that. And I'll start with Scott. Am I right?
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a reminder that tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. in the council chambers, the Historic Preservation Commission is holding a public hearing on the possibility of designating the O'Kane Farm located on First Avenue as local historic district. They encourage everyone interested in historical preservation to come out, comment, just support this process in the city. That's tomorrow night right here in the council chambers at 6:30. Thank you.
Mr. Wickman?
Several announcements. If you haven't noticed by now, the Green Mountain Rec Center is closed this week from the 15th to the 19th. Tomorrow, May 16th, is not only my birthday, but whatever. But in addition, it's going to be a public meeting for the discussing the apartments that are being proposed for Ohio Avenue. This meeting is going to be Tuesday the 16th, starting at 6:30 in the Green Mountain High School Commons area. Also at the end of this week, on Friday the 19th, is the Older Adult Wellness Fair. That's going to be held at the Charles Whitlock Recreation Center. And that goes from, 9 a.m. to noon. And a lot of activities, vendors, demonstrations, discounts, health testing, et cetera, et cetera. Those of you who are interested in community gardens is going to have a meeting on Monday, the 22nd of May at 4:30 at the Foothills Elementary School Library to start planting the community garden there at Foothills Elementary School. And then finally, on May 23rd, Tuesday, is going to be an open house discussing the Union Boulevard Transportation Study, and that goes from 4 till 6 p.m. at the Old Chicago Restaurant.
Thank you. Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you. I didn't do this earlier, and I never know when we get to congratulate everyone who is here, but I just want to congratulate all of the award winners. Sustainability is one of my biggest passions, as all of you are so tired of me saying, but so just such an inspirational evening to see all the award winners and what they're doing in our community. And then also this past Tuesday, we had an exciting night in Southern Gables. And thank you, Karen and Mayor Paul, Councilwoman Harrison and Mayor Paul for being there. We celebrated our 50-year anniversary in Southern Gables. There were 175 people who came. A lot of them were original homeowners who have lived here, purchased their house in 1968. There were pictures of what the neighborhood was like, and it's amazing to see all the changes, and a bunch of neighbors saw each other for the first time in many years. So it's really a special community, and that is all. Thank you.
Franks.
Well, continuing with the sustainability theme, I wanted to congratulate Green Mountain as one of the newest sustainable neighborhoods. and wanted to make sure folks know that they are holding their kickoff meeting. Now, the location is tentative. It'd be at Dunstan Middle School, June 8th, 6 p.m. They've got a Facebook page. The city is going to be putting up a page for them. So all of that's going to be up there. But I know a few people have asked me about the boundaries. If you're in Green Mountain, don't worry about the exact boundaries. You can participate in that, and there's going to be snacks and beverages. And again, it's a way to engage at whatever types of projects are interesting to you, and they're all community driven. So that's the beauty, is the community decides what they want to pursue, and then they pursue it. So I hope you can turn out for that meeting.
Ms. Harrison?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I am so excited about the future of Lakewood, because when we have those young people as examples of what's going to be our future leaders, we're in good hands. I was thrilled to see that tonight. Thank you very much.
Mr. Abel?
No report.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to have a shout out to Deborah Klein, who arranged for a dog due pickup in Holbrook Park this last Saturday. That's especially nice because she does not live around Holbrook Park, and she doesn't even have a dog. And since this is the season to be honoring our mothers, it extends actually beyond yesterday. I'm reminded of the pastor that asked the little girl, "Why did your mommy choose your daddy?" And she looked up at the pastor and very easily and quickly said, "My grandma says she didn't have on her thinking hat." So there you go. There you go.
Ms. Shockey?
That's it. Just a couple more events. Saturday, May 20th. If you have yard waste related to the recent storm or something else, organic waste, you can bring it from 8 to 2 to the Lakewood Greenhouses, 9556 West Yale. Also Saturday from, I guess I don't have the exact times. I have 8 to 9. That doesn't seem quite right, but Saturday morning, I believe, there's a volunteer event to remove noxious weeds from the park around the Heritage Center, and it's also an opportunity to learn about noxious weeds. So you get to do some of each, and if you RSVP and the information's on the city calendar, you get free lunch. And then there's also Saturday, Monterey Park Family Farm Fiesta, 12 to 2.
And there's 5 people in this room running in a race on Saturday, so don't forget who you are.
So we won't have any conflicts of schedules at all.
Walking swiftly. Michelle? Mr. Cox? Ms. Hodson?
Thank you. I just wanted to give a quick update of the impacts of the storm that we experienced a week ago today. So first, internally, it really hit us hard. We had 110 city vehicles were damaged, and that includes a combination of glass, body damage, mirrors, overhead lights, GPS on patrol cars. So now internally, our fleet division is repairing the glass, lights, and GPS, and police vehicles first, and then followed by glass in community resources, the transportation buses, followed then by the glass in all the other vehicles. So we're doing everything we can to do this as quickly as possible. We have initial reports of we're estimating between 12,000 and 15,000 residential roofs that were damaged. Compare that to the 2009 storm that resulted in about 15,500 roofs. It took about 18 months for people to get all of that completed. We also saw, and you've seen this in the news, our Colorado Mills Mall was severely impacted by this storm last Monday. They call it the 11-minute event, and they really suffered extensive damage to their roofing system. It was unbelievable. I was there with our police chief the day after and got to go on the roof and see that damage, and then was in the mall, and the precipitation was coming down on my head inside the mall. So we've been extending as much support as we can as a city. You know that we have a police substation there at the mall, and that is that whole substation is in disrepair. So we've transferred those officers, those agents here to our station here while the repairs are being done. I want to read just a little bit. The mills haven't done very much by way of PR. You might remember we have about 3,000 employees at the Colorado Mills Mall who are impacted by this damage. And here's a statement that they made to their tenants. Here's just a piece of it. Colorado Mills sustained extensive roof damage during Monday's severe hailstorm as a result of rain leaking into the mall interior. I can vouch for that. The common areas and tenant spaces suffered substantial water damage. Power has been restored, but due to the continued rain and damage to the electrical systems, mechanical systems, including HVAC and lighting, they are not currently at full capacity. They're working as quickly as they can. They don't have an estimate in terms of when they'll be up and operating again. But I have extended an invitation to the general manager, who, as I said, we're working very closely with, to come and give you an overview when they're ready for that. Right now, they're in fix-it mode, and their first priority is sealing the roof and talking to all the tenants and that kind of stuff. So when they have that ability, she's been very gracious, and she'll come and do some kind of overview at her convenience. I asked her to come next Monday, and I'm not sure that's going to be possible. So thoughts and prayers with those folks at the mall, and especially the small tenants who have invested their life savings for the inventory and for those small businesses. So we just hope that they can get this up and running again soon. Thank you.
For that, and they estimate that in those 11 minutes they had 4 inches of softball-size hail accumulate on the roof. So if you can picture their wood floors that were all throughout, those are already gone. I mean, it's unfortunate. The best part is, as far as injuries go, nobody was hurt. And so we're going to go through the community. If you have folks who have questions, especially our elderly folks, as the roofers come through town, we need to look out for scams. We need to be aware. I know Nextdoor and the city's trying to post information as we can go, but keep an extra eye out for folks. And, they're already coming through. It was amazing in the Green Mountain area. There was a biplane flying around with a sign telling you who to call for a new roof. So it's just, they move in hot and heavy, and they're going to be here for a while. And it's also not big malls. Johnny's Pizza, who's a great sponsor of many things on Mississippi and Wadsworth, they're shut down. Their roof came in. So it's a lot of our smaller businesses too. So when they start to ramp up, I'd love to see the community get out and support them again. Yes, Ms. Hodson?
One more thing, when the mall is ready to release a public statement, we'll put that on our website too to help them with the coverage.
Great. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Seeing none, close her down at 9:22. Thank you all for coming out.